I turned 18 on a Tuesday, and by midnight, I was standing on the front porch with a garbage bag full of clothes and nowhere to go. It wasn't supposed to end like this. I'd imagined cake, maybe a small dinner with my parents and my younger sister, Emma. Nothing extravagant, just acknowledgement. Instead, I got a courtroom in my own living room, with my mother as judge, my father as silent jury, and Emma as the only witness who mattered. "We know you took it, Rachel." My mother's voice had that flatness to it, the kind that doesn't invite explanation. She stood near the kitchen counter, arms crossed, her reading glasses still perched on her head from whatever she'd been doing before this became the priority of the evening. The overhead light made everything feel overexposed, too bright, too real. I blinked. "Took what?" "Don't play innocent." My father finally spoke, though he didn't look at me. He was looking at the wall behind my shoulder, somewhere safer than my eyes. "Emma told us everything." Emma sat curled on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, her face half hidden behind a curtain of dark hair. She was 15 then, small for her age, with that kind of delicate frame that made people want to protect her. She'd been crying, her eyes were still red-rimmed, her breath hitching in that fragile, post-sob rhythm. She looked devastated. She looked like the victim. I looked like the villain, apparently. "Emma, what are you talking about?" I turned to her, searching for some hint of reason, some crack in whatever story she'd built. "What did I supposedly take?" She flinched, actually flinched, as if my words were a physical threat. "You know what you did," she whispered, her voice so soft my parents had to lean in to hear her. That was her specialty, making people lean in, making them work to catch her pain. "The money from Mom's drawer. The necklace Grandma gave me. You've been taking things for weeks." My stomach dropped, not because it was true, because I realized, in that moment, that the truth didn't matter. I didn't take anything. My voice sounded strange, too calm, like it belonged to someone watching this happen from a distance. "Mom, Dad, I swear, I don't know what she's talking about." My mother's jaw tightened. That was answer enough. "We've noticed things missing. Emma's been too scared to say anything until now. She didn't want to get you in trouble." The air felt thick, like trying to breathe through fabric. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of a car passing outside, the creak of the floorboards under my father's shifting weight. Everything was so ordinary, so mundane, and yet the ground was disappearing beneath me. "Too scared?" I repeated, and for the first time, something sharp entered my voice. "She's lying." Emma made a small, wounded sound. My mother moved closer to her, a hand on her shoulder, a physical declaration of allegiance. "That's enough." My father's voice was firmer now, and he finally looked at me. But it wasn't the look I needed. It was the look you give a stranger who's overstayed their welcome. "We didn't raise you to be cruel, Rachel. Taking things is one thing. Lying about it and then attacking your sister is something else entirely." Attacking. The word hung in the air like smoke. I hadn't raised my voice beyond normal conversation. I hadn't moved toward her. But somehow, in the physics of this room, I was the aggressor. "I'm not lying." My hands were shaking now. I pressed them against my sides, trying to steady myself, trying to find some foothold in the conversation. "Why would I take Mom's money? I have a job. I have my own savings." "Which you've been spending on God knows what," my mother said, her tone clipped, efficient. "New clothes, going out with friends. We've seen the receipts." I wanted to laugh. The receipts were from the coffee shop where I worked, from the thrift store where I bought secondhand books, from the grocery store where I picked up things for dinner when they were too tired to cook. But explaining felt pointless. They'd already written the story. I was just a character who refused to follow the script. "Emma." I tried one more time, my voice softer now, almost pleading. "Why are you doing this?" She looked up then, and for just a second, less than a heartbeat, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not guilt, exactly. Something colder, something satisfied. Then her face crumpled again, fresh tears spilling over, and my mother pulled her closer. "That's it," my mother said, her voice final, a door slamming shut. "I want you out." The words didn't register at first. They were too big, too absurd. "What?" "You heard me. Pack your things. I won't have you in this house treating your sister like this, stealing from us, lying to our faces." My father nodded. A small, mechanical movement. Agreement without conviction, but agreement nonetheless. I stood there, waiting for the punchline, for someone to break, for reality to reassert itself. But the silence stretched, and no one spoke. No one took it back. You're serious. It wasn't a question. Completely. My mother's face was stone. You're 18 now, an adult. You can figure it out. The cruelty of the timing wasn't lost on me. Midnight had barely passed. I'd been an adult for less than an hour, and already, that technicality was being weaponized. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg. I wanted to shake them until they saw me, really saw me. The daughter who'd made honor roll every semester, who babysat Emma when they worked late, who never asked for much because I learned early that asking led to disappointment. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I walked upstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last, and started pulling clothes from my closet. My room looked the same as it had that morning. Pale blue walls. A desk cluttered with textbooks and notes from my online college courses. A bulletin board covered in photos me and Emma at the beach 2 summers ago, both of us sunburned and grinning. Me and my parents at my high school graduation, their arms around me, pride evident in their smiles. The images felt like artifacts from someone else's life. I grabbed the garbage bag from under the sink. Ironic, I thought distantly, that I was literally being treated like trash and started filling it. I didn't fold anything. I didn't take my time. I just shoved in jeans, shirts, underwear, socks, my winter coat, the book on my nightstand, my laptop, chargers, my wallet, my phone, the bare essentials of existence. I left the photos. I left the stuffed animal I'd had since I was 6. I left the jewelry box my grandmother had given me, the one with the tiny ballerina that spun when you opened it. If they thought I was a thief, I'd leave with nothing they could question. When I came back downstairs, they were still in the same positions. My mother by the counter, my father near the wall, Emma on the couch, now watching me with an expression I couldn't read. She looked smaller than ever, swallowed by the oversized hoodie she wore. My hoodie, I realized with a bitter jolt, one I'd been looking for last week. I'll need my birth certificate, I said, my voice mechanical. And my social security card. My mother hesitated, then disappeared into the study. She returned with a manila envelope, which she handed to me without a word. Our fingers didn't touch. That's everything? She asked. I looked at the garbage bag. At the envelope. At the life I was apparently leaving behind. Yeah. That's everything. My father cleared his throat. You have somewhere to go? For a moment, I almost told the truth that I had no idea, that my best friend was 2 states away at college, that I'd burned through most of my savings helping with household bills. But I caught myself. I'll figure it out. He nodded, relief visible in the relaxation of his shoulders. They wanted to believe I'd be fine. It made this easier for them. I walked to the front door, the garbage bag rustling with each step, an awful soundtrack to the strangest moment of my life. My hand was on the doorknob when Emma spoke. Rachel? Her voice was small again, tentative. I didn't turn around. What? I'm sorry. 2 words. Soft. Almost believable. Almost. I opened the door. The October air hit me, colder than I'd expected, carrying the scent of dead leaves and distant rain. The porch light cast everything in harsh yellow, creating shadows that seemed too deep, too complete. No, you're not, I said quietly and stepped outside. The door closed behind me with a soft click, not a slam. Somehow, that made it worse. There was no drama in it, no final confrontation, just the quiet, mundane sound of a door shutting, of a chapter ending without ceremony. I stood there on the porch, the concrete cold beneath my sneakers, the garbage bag heavy in my hand, and looked at the street I'd grown up on. Mrs. Chen's house across the way, dark except for the porch light. The Ramirez family's minivan in their driveway. The oak tree I'd climbed as a kid, its branches now bare against the night sky. Everything looked exactly the same. The world hadn't shifted. The neighborhood hadn't noticed. It was just me, alone on a porch at 18 years and 1 hour old, holding everything I owned in a garbage bag, with no idea where I'd sleep tonight. I thought I should cry. That's what people did in moments like this, wasn't it? But my eyes stayed dry, my breath steady. Instead of grief, I felt something stranger, a kind of floating confusion, a disconnect between what had just happened and my ability to process it. Somewhere inside the house, life was continuing. Maybe Emma was already in her room. Maybe my parents were cleaning up, moving on, relieved the confrontation was over. Maybe they were already forgetting. I took a step down, then another, then I was walking, my destination uncertain, my future unwritten, carrying the weight of everything I'd lost and the strange, terrifying freedom of having nothing left to lose. I didn't understand the pattern until I was sitting in a 2-4 hour diner at 3 in the morning, nursing cold coffee I couldn't afford to refill, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. The diner smelled like grease and disinfectant, and the fluorescent lights buzzed with a persistence that made my exhaustion feel physical. I'd been there for 4 hours, the sympathetic night manager pretending not to notice I was using the booth as a temporary bedroom. My phone was down to 6% battery, my garbage bag of belongings shoved against the wall, and I was finally allowing myself to think about the years that had led to this moment. Emma had always been fragile. That's what everyone said, what I believed, what became the unquestionable truth of our family. She was born 6 weeks premature, spent her first month in the NICU, and my parents brought home a tiny, terrifying creature who seemed too delicate for the world. I was 3 years old, too young to remember her arrival, but old enough to absorb the anxiety that permeated our house afterward. My earliest memory of Emma isn't warm, it's clinical. I'm maybe 5, she's 2, and I'm being taught how to be gentle with her. My mother's hands on my shoulders, guiding me, her voice soft but insistent. "Careful, Rachel. You have to be so careful with your sister." As if Emma were made of glass, as if I were made of hammers. I learned to take up less space, to speak more quietly, to celebrate my achievements in whispers so as not to overshadow her struggles. When I made the honor roll in 5th grade, my parents took me to dinner, just the 3 of us, because Emma was home with a babysitter, recovering from one of her frequent migraines. We went to a chain restaurant, ordered quickly, ate efficiently, and returned home within 90 minutes. My certificate went on the refrigerator for a week before disappearing into a drawer somewhere. When Emma passed her first spelling test that same year after months of tutoring and encouragement, my parents threw a party, balloons, a cake from the fancy bakery, relatives invited over to celebrate. She beamed under the attention, and I told myself I was happy for her. Maybe I even believed it. But there were moments, small fractures in the narrative we'd all accepted. I was 12 when I first caught Emma in a lie. She'd told our parents that I'd hidden her favorite stuffed animal, the threadbare rabbit she'd had since infancy. I hadn't touched it. I rarely went into her room. But she was inconsolable, sobbing with such conviction that my parents immediately assumed I'd done something cruel, some act of sibling rivalry taken too far. I found the rabbit the next day, tucked under Emma's bed, right where she'd apparently looked multiple times. When I showed it to her, she stared at me with those wide, innocent eyes and said, "I guess I just missed it." No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a shrug and a return to normalcy, while I was left with the unsettling feeling that something deliberate had just occurred. At 14, Emma told my parents I'd been sneaking out at night. I hadn't been. I was the kid who stayed home, who finished homework early, who went to bed by 10 because I had early morning swim practice. But Emma described it with such detail: the sound of my window opening, the sight of me climbing down the trellis, the hours I was allegedly gone that my parents installed locks on my windows. From the outside, I couldn't open them even if I'd wanted to. When I asked her why she'd lied, she cried. "I thought I saw you," she insisted, her voice breaking. "I was trying to protect you. I was worried about you." And somehow, her lie became an act of sisterly concern, while my anger at being falsely accused became evidence of my guilt. I stopped trying to defend myself after that. It was easier. The weeks after my 18th birthday were a study in survival. I spent the first night in that diner, the second on a friend's couch. Sophie, a girl from my coffee shop job who barely knew me but had enough compassion to offer shelter. Her apartment was a studio in a questionable neighborhood, but it had a door that locked and a futon that didn't smell too bad. She charged me $40 a week, which felt like both a kindness and a fortune. "You can stay as long as you need," Sophie said, handing me a towel and a pillow that first night. She was 23, covered in tattoos, with a directness I found both comforting and jarring. "But I'm going to say this once whatever happened with your family, you need to figure out if you're running from them or running towards something, because running from never ends well." I didn't have an answer for her then. I picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop, working open to close most days, my hands raw from constant dishwashing, my feet aching from standing on tile floors. The owner, Marcus, was a 60-year-old veteran with a soft spot for strays. He paid me under the table, let me take home the pastries that didn't sell, and never asked questions about why an 18-year-old was suddenly homeless. "You're reliable," he told me after 2 weeks. "That's rare. Most kids your age think the world owes them something. You just show up and work." I didn't tell him that showing up was the only thing I knew how to do. That working kept my mind occupied, kept the questions at bay, kept me from having to sit with the betrayal that had rewired my understanding of love. The coffee shop became my laboratory for watching people, for understanding the versions of themselves they presented to the world. There was the woman who ordered a triple shot latte every morning at 6:15, always polite, always generous with tips, but whose hands shook so badly she could barely hold the cup. The businessman who came in at lunch, charming and jovial, who I later overheard berating someone on his phone in the parking lot, his voice cruel and cold. The teenager who stole packets of sugar and napkins with a desperation that spoke to a hunger beyond caffeine. Everyone was performing. Everyone had a narrative they wanted believed. I started wondering what Emma's narrative was. Why she'd needed me gone. What she gained from my absence. "You ever think about calling them?" Sophie asked one night, 3 weeks into my stay. We were eating ramen on her futon, watching a reality show neither of us cared about, just filling the silence. "Every day," I admitted. And then I remember that they didn't call me. My phone had stayed silent. No texts. No voicemails. Not even an email asking if I was alive. The silence was louder than any argument could have been. "Maybe they're waiting for you to apologize," Sophie suggested, slurping noodles. "For what? Something I didn't do?" She shrugged. "People believe what they want to believe, especially about family." By the end of the first month, I'd saved enough for a security deposit on a room in a shared house. It was in a neighborhood that made Sophie's place look upscale, a converted garage behind a main house, with walls so thin I could hear my landlord's television through the ceiling. But it was mine. My name on a month-to-month lease. My space that no one could take away without 30 days' notice. I bought a mattress from a thrift store, sheets from a discount warehouse, a lamp from a yard sale. I unpacked the garbage bag I'd been living out of for weeks and hung my clothes on a tension rod in the corner. It wasn't much. It barely qualified as living. But it was honest. Marcus promoted me to shift supervisor at the coffee shop, which came with an extra $2 an hour and the responsibility of opening and closing. I learned to make schedules, to manage inventory, to handle difficult customers, with the kind of calm that comes from knowing that nothing they could say would be worse than what I'd already survived. "You're good at this," Marcus observed one afternoon watching me de-escalate a situation with a customer who was angry about her order. "You don't react, you just absorb and redirect." "Years of practice," I said without thinking. He gave me a look that suggested he understood more than I'd meant to reveal. I enrolled in online classes at the community college, using financial aid and a small scholarship I'd applied for months before everything fell apart. Psychology, I decided. I wanted to understand the mechanics of manipulation, the architecture of dysfunction, the reasons people hurt each other and call it love. My professor for Intro to Psychology was a woman named Dr. Chen, who taught through video lectures that felt more like conversations. In one early session, she discussed family systems theory, the idea that families develop patterns and roles that each member unconsciously maintains. "There's often a scapegoat," she explained, her voice calm and academic. "The person who's blamed for family dysfunction, who carries the collective anxiety, who's pushed out when the system becomes too unstable. Removing the scapegoat doesn't solve the underlying problems. It just creates temporary relief until a new scapegoat is needed." I paused the video and replayed that section 3 times. The realization that followed wasn't sudden. It was gradual, like watching a photograph develop in a darkroom, the image becoming clearer with each passing second. Emma hadn't lied about me because she hated me. She'd lied because she needed me to be the problem. Because, as long as I was the troublemaker, the thief, the difficult one, she could remain the fragile, protected daughter who required constant defense. I was her insurance policy, her emotional shield. And when I turned 18, when the possibility arose that I might leave anyway, might build a life that didn't revolve around managing her needs, she'd simply accelerated the timeline. By the third month, I had a routine. Work, school, sleep, repeat. I made acquaintances but not friends, kept conversations surface level, protected the raw parts of myself that still ached when touched. I was functional, stable, moving forward, as everyone insisted I should. But I wasn't healed. I was just well managed. Sophie noticed. "You're like a robot," she said when I stopped by her place to return a book she'd lent me. "You go through the motions, but there's nothing behind your eyes." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "That's exactly what I mean." She studied me with the intensity of someone who'd survived her own trauma and recognized the signs in others. "You're performing fine. You're not actually fine." I didn't argue. She was right. I was a collection of coping mechanisms held together by sheer determination. I woke up. I worked. I studied. I paid my bills. I existed in a space between anger and acceptance, unable to fully embrace either. The hardest part wasn't the physical struggle. It was the absence of closure. The unanswered questions that circled my mind during quiet moments. Did they ever wonder if they'd been wrong? Did Emma ever feel guilty? Did my father ever speak up? Or had he been relieved to have the decision made for him? Did my mother ever look at the empty space at the dinner table and feel regret? I didn't know, and not knowing was its own kind of torture. I started writing, keeping a journal that was part diary, part investigation. I documented memories with new eyes, looking for patterns I'd missed, connections I hadn't made. The birthday party incident when I was 7, when Emma claimed I'd pushed her into the pool I hadn't been anywhere near her. The Christmas when money went missing from my grandmother's purse, and Emma suggested I'd taken it to buy presents. I'd made all my gifts by hand that year. The school project that mysteriously disappeared the night before it was due. With Emma swearing she'd seen me throw it away, I'd stayed up until 2 in the morning working on it. Small incidents, isolated enough to be dismissed as misunderstandings. But together, they formed a portrait of something deliberate, something calculated. I was 4 months into my new life when I received the first message. Not from my parents, from Emma. A text that appeared on my phone during a closing shift, casual and cheerful as if nothing had happened. "Hey, hope you're doing well. Miss you." 3 sentences that detonated the careful stability I'd built. I stared at the screen until it went dark, then stared at my reflection in the black glass, trying to decide who I was supposed to be in this moment. The forgiving sister? The angry exile? The person who'd moved on? I didn't respond. Not that night. But the message had achieved its purpose. It had reminded me that the story wasn't over, that the people who'd cast me out still had the power to reach me, to disturb the fragile peace I'd constructed from nothing. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a question began to form, not whether I wanted to reconnect with my family, but whether I was strong enough to face what reconnecting might reveal. I was restocking oat milk in the back cooler when Marcus poked his head in, his expression caught between confusion and concern. "Rachel, there's someone here to see you, says it's urgent." My first thought was my parents. My second was Emma. Both scenarios made my stomach clench. I wiped my hands on my apron and followed Marcus to the front, where a woman in a charcoal suit stood near the espresso machine, looking wildly out of place among the coffee-stained artists and laptop nomads who comprised our usual clientele. She was maybe 50, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that cataloged everything in a single sweep. Her briefcase looked more expensive than my entire month's rent. "Rachel Winters?" she asked, her voice crisp and professional. "That's me." I stayed behind the counter, maintaining the barrier between us like a shield. "My name is Patricia Holloway. I'm an attorney with Holloway and Associates." She pulled a business card from her jacket pocket and placed it on the counter between us. I represent the estate of Margaret Winters, your grandmother. The name hit me like cold water. My grandmother had died when I was 16, a quiet passing after a brief illness. She'd left behind her house, which my parents sold, and various possessions that got distributed among family members. I'd received a few books and a necklace I rarely wore. That had been the end of it, or so I'd thought. "I'm sorry, I don't understand," I said, aware that Marcus was hovering nearby, pretending to wipe down tables while clearly listening. "My grandmother's estate was settled years ago." Patricia's expression softened slightly, a crack in her professional facade. "There was a trust. One your grandmother established specifically for you, with conditions that only recently became active. May we speak somewhere private?" The world tilted slightly. Marcus caught my eye and nodded toward his office, a cramped space behind the storage room that smelled of old coffee and paperwork. I led Patricia back, my mind racing through possibilities, none of them making sense. She settled into the chair across from Marcus's desk with practiced ease, opening her briefcase to retrieve a folder thick with documents. "Your grandmother created a trust for you in the amount of $68,000 to be released on your 18th birthday, provided certain conditions were met." The number was so specific, so substantial, that I couldn't process it. 68,000? It was the exact amount your grandfather left her when he passed, minus administrative costs. "She wanted you to have it." Patricia pulled out a letter, the handwriting instantly recognizable, my grandmother's elegant script, slightly shaky in her final years. "She left this for you as well." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind my grandmother used for important correspondence. I broke the seal carefully, as if the contents might evaporate if handled roughly. The letter was dated 2 months before her death. "My dearest Rachel, if you're reading this, you've turned 18, and Patricia has done her job in finding you. I've instructed her to locate you personally, not through your parents, for reasons that I hope will become clear. This money is yours. It comes with no strings, no expectations, except one, that you use it to build a life that's truly yours, not one dictated by obligation or guilt. I've watched you grow into a young woman who carries more than her share. I've seen how you make yourself small so others can be large. I've noticed things that perhaps you thought no one saw. Trust your instincts, sweet girl. They're better than you know. With all my love. Grandma Margaret." I read it 3 times, searching for hidden meanings, for clarity in the deliberate vagueness. Patricia waited patiently, her hands folded on the desk. "I don't understand," I finally said, my voice rough. "Why didn't anyone tell me about this?" "Because your grandmother was very specific about the terms. The trust was confidential, administered through our firm, with instructions that we were to contact you directly upon your 18th birthday at your parents' address." She paused, and something flickered in her professional demeanor. "When we sent the initial notification letters, they were returned as undeliverable. Wrong address. It took us some time to locate you." A chill crawled down my spine. "What address did you send them to?" She consulted her notes. 4,237 Maple Drive. That's the address on file as your parents' residence." "That's correct." My mouth felt dry. "That's where they live." "The Postal Service indicated no one by your name resided there. We tried multiple times over several months. Eventually, we hired a private investigator to locate you." Her tone remained neutral, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. "Which is when we discovered you'd been living independently since your 18th birthday, working here." The implication hung in the air between us. They'd told the Postal Service I didn't live there. My parents had actively prevented me from receiving notification about my grandmother's trust. "There's more," Patricia continued, pulling out additional documents. "The trust included a stipulation that in order to receive the funds, certain conditions needed verification. Your grandmother wanted confirmation that accusations of theft made against you in the year following her death were unfounded." My breath caught. "What?" "It's unusual, I'll admit. But your grandmother was quite specific. She'd heard rumors about money and items going missing in your household, and she wanted to ensure that if you were being blamed unjustly, there was a mechanism for establishing the truth." Patricia spread several papers across the desk. She hired a private investigator shortly before her death to document certain facts. These are his findings. The documents were clinical, detached, but their content made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing deposits into Emma's account that corresponded with the dates items had allegedly been stolen. Photos of Emma wearing the necklace she claimed I'd taken, dated before she reported it missing. A sworn statement from a pawnshop owner who'd sold several pieces of jewelry to my mother jewelry that had supposedly been stolen by me and never recovered. I don't understand, I whispered, though understanding was crashing over me in waves. She knew? Your grandmother suspected something was wrong. She didn't have all the pieces, but she had enough to want protections in place for you. Patricia's voice gentled. The investigator she hired continued his work after her death, at our firm's instruction, documenting incidents up until your 18th birthday, including the accusation that led to your parents removing you from their home. She pulled out a final document. This one, a bank statement with highlighted entries. On the night of your 18th birthday, when you were accused of stealing $200 from your mother's drawer, that exact amount was deposited into your sister's checking account at 7:15 p.m., 2 hours before the confrontation began. The office walls seemed to close in. I gripped the edge of the desk, trying to anchor myself to something solid. Emma took the money and blamed me. The evidence strongly suggests a pattern of behavior. Patricia's professionalism couldn't quite mask the disgust in her tone. Your grandmother wanted you to have this information along with the trust. She hoped you'd never need it, that her suspicions were wrong, but she wanted you protected regardless. I thought of my grandmother in those final months, how she'd watched our family with an intensity I'd attributed to illness-induced anxiety, the way she'd held my hand at her bedside and told me I was stronger than I knew, the fierce look in her eyes when she'd made me promise to never let anyone diminish me. She'd known, maybe not the specifics but enough, and she'd tried to give me ammunition. What happens now? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Now, you decide. The trust is yours regardless of what you choose to do with this information. $68,000, minus the administrative costs, which brings it to approximately $65,000. It's been accruing interest since your 18th birthday, so the total is actually closer to $67,000 now. She slid a form across the desk. Sign here, provide your banking information, and the funds will be transferred within 3 business days. I stared at the signature line. My grandmother's final gift. Not just money, but truth, evidence, validation for every moment I'd doubted myself, every time I'd wondered if I was crazy for thinking something wasn't right. Can I ask you something? I looked up at Patricia, this stranger who'd upended my carefully maintained equilibrium. The investigation, was it legal? Completely. Your grandmother hired a licensed private investigator to document facts regarding her own estate and potential theft within her family. Everything was obtained legally and can be verified independently. She closed her briefcase with a decisive click. What you do with the information is entirely your choice. You could confront your family. You could pursue legal action for the slander and wrongful eviction, though that would be difficult to prove given your age at the time. Or you could simply take the money and move forward. The options spread before me like paths in a garden, each leading somewhere different. I could feel the weight of the decision, the magnitude of having proof that my family had betrayed me in ways I'd only suspected. But beneath the shock and the anger, something else was emerging. A strange, cold clarity. I signed the form, my handwriting surprisingly steady. I need copies of everything. Patricia smiled, a real smile this time, and began preparing duplicates. I thought you might. When I left Marcus's office 20 minutes later, I had a folder full of evidence, a promise of $67,000, and the distinct sensation that my grandmother was somewhere watching, satisfied with a plan executed from beyond the grave. Marcus looked up from the espresso machine where he was training a new hire. Everything okay? Yeah. The word came out stronger than I expected. Everything's about to be very okay. That night, alone in my converted garage, I spread the documents across my second-hand mattress and studied them like maps to a country I'd only heard about. Each bank statement, each photograph, each piece of evidence was a small betrayal that added up to something monstrous. The necklace incident happened when I was 14. Emma had received it from our grandmother for her birthday, a delicate gold chain with a small sapphire pendant. 2 weeks later, she claimed I'd stolen it. My parents had searched my room, found nothing, and grounded me anyway for being uncooperative during the investigation. In the photograph Patricia had given me, Emma was wearing that necklace in a school photo taken 3 days before she reported it stolen. The date stamp in the corner was irrefutable. The missing money from my mother's drawer had a similar pattern. The accusation came first. The deposit into Emma's account came hours before, as if she'd needed to hide the evidence and decided the best hiding place was in plain sight, protected by the assumption that no one would suspect her. There were others. A gift card that went missing from my father's wallet. Concert tickets that vanished from my mother's purse. Each time, I'd been blamed. Each time, evidence suggested Emma had been the one benefiting from the theft. But it was the final entry that made me set down the papers and stare at the water-stained ceiling of my garage room. A notation from the investigator, dated 3 days after my 18th birthday. Subject's sister Emma Winters observed meeting with parents, overheard stating, "I knew she'd leave eventually anyway. This just makes it official. Now maybe you'll finally pay attention to me." Parents did not respond. She'd admitted it. Not to me, not in any way that mattered. But she'd said it out loud. The truth I'd suspected but couldn't prove that I hadn't been exiled for what I'd done, but for what I represented. A threat to her monopoly on our parents' attention and concern. I picked up my phone, Emma's unanswered text still glowing in my message history. "Hope you're doing well. Miss you." Performative concern. A check-in that cost nothing and meant less. For months, I'd wondered if I should respond, if silence was strength or cowardice. Now, holding evidence of her systematic destruction of my place in our family, I understood that responding wasn't about her. It was about me, about what I needed to say, about closing a chapter that had been left bleeding and open. But not yet. Not until I understood exactly what I wanted the ending to be. I gathered the documents and placed them back in the folder, then tucked it into the small safe I'd bought after 3 months of saving, a precaution that now felt prophetic. The key went on a chain around my neck, resting against my sternum, a tangible reminder that I held something valuable and dangerous. The next morning, I called Patricia from my break at work, standing in the alley behind the coffee shop where the dumpsters created a strange echo chamber. "I want to know everything else your investigator found," I said without preamble. "Every detail, every observation, everything you didn't include in the initial packet." There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "There's quite a bit more. We included what was relevant to the trust conditions. The rest is extensive." I want it all. "May I ask why?" Her tone wasn't judgmental, just curious, professional. I watched a cat pick through the recycling bin, methodical and patient. "Because I need to understand what I'm dealing with, and I need to know if there's more I don't know about. I can have the complete file ready by tomorrow afternoon. Fair warning, some of it is difficult to read. The investigator was thorough, and your sister's patterns extend beyond theft." My grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" "Come to my office tomorrow, 2 p.m. We'll go through everything together." She hesitated, and for the first time, her professional mask fully dropped. "Rachel, your grandmother wanted you to have resources and information, but she also wanted you to have choices. Whatever you decide to do with this, make sure it's what you need, not what you think she would have wanted or what would hurt your family most. Make it about your healing." The word healing sat strangely in my mind. I'd been so focused on surviving, on building stability from rubble, that healing felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. But standing in that alley, with evidence of my innocence and the promise of financial security, I realized that maybe healing wasn't a luxury. Maybe it was the only thing that mattered. Patricia's office was located in a building that whispered old money marble floors, brass fixtures, the kind of elevator that required an attendant. The conference room she led me to felt designed for difficult conversations, with its long mahogany table and windows that overlooked the city like a reminder that life continued regardless of personal catastrophe. The complete investigative file sat between us, easily 3 inches thick. Patricia had flagged sections with color-coded tabs, each representing a different category of findings. Yellow for financial discrepancies, blue for witness statements, red for what she delicately termed behavioral patterns. There were a lot of red tabs. "Before we begin," Patricia said, pouring water from a crystal pitcher into 2 glasses, "I want you to understand that what's in this file goes beyond proving your innocence. Your grandmother's investigator documented a comprehensive pattern of manipulative behavior that extends into areas you may not have been aware of." I took a sip of water, buying myself a moment. The glass was heavy, substantial, the kind of object that demanded you pay attention to it. "How bad are we talking?" She opened to the first red tab. "Your sister has been systematically undermining your relationships for years. Friends who stopped calling, teachers who suddenly became critical, extended family members who grew distant. There's documentation suggesting active interference in nearly every social connection you attempted to build." The words landed with a strange absence of surprise. Some part of me had always known, had felt the invisible hand that seemed to push people away, just as I was getting close. But seeing it confirmed, documented with dates and details, transformed suspicion into certainty. Patricia walked me through it methodically. Emma had told my sophomore year best friend that I'd been spreading rumors about her, providing specific enough details that the friendship imploded overnight. She'd informed my swim coach that I'd been considering quitting, leading to a series of confrontational conversations that made practices unbearable. She'd told my aunt, my mother's sister, who I'd been close to, that I'd called her boring and old-fashioned, creating a rift that had never healed. "How did the investigator confirm all this?" I asked, staring at a transcript of a conversation Emma had with my former friend. "Your sister kept records, text messages, emails, even a journal where she documented her interventions." Patricia's expression was carefully neutral. She seemed to view it as a project, ensuring you remained isolated and dependent on the family unit she controlled. The sociopathic precision of it should have shocked me. Instead, I felt a weird sense of validation. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't been deficient or unlikable or cursed with bad luck. I'd been sabotaged. "I need to show them," I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. "I need my parents to see this." Patricia studied me for a long moment. "Are you certain? Once you expose this, there's no going back to whatever relationship existed before." "There is no relationship. There hasn't been one for 7 months. I met her gaze squarely. "But I need them to know the truth. Not for reconciliation. For closure." She nodded slowly. "Then let's discuss how to make this as effective as possible." We spent 2 hours strategizing. Patricia advised treating it like a deposition, controlled, factual, with evidence presented systematically to prevent emotional derailment. She offered to attend as a neutral third party, lending legal weight to the proceedings. We scheduled it for the following Saturday, 2 p.m., at her office. "I'll contact your parents and extend the invitation," Patricia said. "I'll frame it as a matter related to your grandmother's estate that requires their presence. They'll come." "And Emma?" "Her presence is essential. She needs to be there when the truth comes out." That night, I barely slept. I rehearsed conversations in my mind, imagined their reactions, prepared for every possible response from denial to violence. But when Saturday arrived, I felt eerily calm, as if I'd stepped outside my own anxiety and was watching events unfold from a safe distance. I arrived 30 minutes early, wearing clothes I'd bought specifically for this meeting: charcoal pants, a cream blouse, clothing that said I'd moved beyond the garbage bag refugee they'd created. Patricia met me in the lobby, gave my outfit an approving nod, and handed me a folder containing copies of everything we'd be presenting. "Remember," she said as we rode the elevator up, "you control the pace. If you need a break, we take one. If you want to stop, we stop. This is your truth to tell." They arrived at exactly 2 p.m., my mother in a navy dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, my father in his standard weekend uniform of khakis and a polo shirt, Emma in something floral and innocent that would have been more appropriate for a garden party. They looked prosperous, comfortable, untouched by the 7 months that had aged me in ways that had nothing to do with time. My mother's face when she saw me was a study in controlled surprise. "Rachel, we weren't told you'd be here." "It's my meeting," I said simply. "Please, sit down." Patricia gestured to the chairs across the table, establishing the geography of the confrontation, them on one side, us on the other. Emma's eyes darted between me and the lawyer, confusion flickering across her features. My father looked uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Thank you for coming," Patricia began, her voice professional and crisp. "We've asked you here to discuss matters related to Margaret Winters's estate and to address certain accusations that were made against Rachel shortly after her 18th birthday." My mother stiffened. "I don't see what Margaret's estate has to do with everything," I interrupted quietly. "It has to do with everything." Patricia opened her file. "Mrs. Winters, Mr. Winters, Emma, I'm going to present a series of documents and ask that you review them carefully before responding. These materials were compiled by a private investigator hired by Margaret Winters in the months before her death and continuing afterward at the instruction of our firm." She slid the first set of papers across the table, bank statements with highlighted entries, showing deposits into Emma's account corresponding with reported thefts. My parents leaned forward, reading, their expressions shifting from confusion to concentration. Emma didn't move. She'd gone very still, her hands folded in her lap, her face carefully blank. "These records indicate a pattern," Patricia continued, "whereby items and money reported stolen from the Winters household subsequently appeared in Emma's possession or accounts, often within hours of the accusation against Rachel." "That's not—" Emma started, but my mother held up a hand, still reading. The silence stretched. I watched my father's face as comprehension dawned, watched the small muscle in his jaw tighten. My mother's fingers trembled slightly as she turned pages. "The night of Rachel's 18th birthday," Patricia said, her tone unchanged. $200 was reported missing from Mrs. Winters' dresser drawer. That exact amount was deposited into Emma's checking account at 7:15 p.m., approximately 2 hours before Rachel was accused of the theft. My mother looked up sharply. "Emma, I can explain." Emma's voice was smaller now, missing its usual confidence. "Please do," I said, speaking directly to her for the first time. "Explain how you deposited money 2 hours before it was stolen." Her mouth opened, closed. The mask of fragility she wore so expertly was slipping, revealing something harder underneath. The deposit was from babysitting. I'd been saving it. Patricia slid another document across. "The deposit slip indicates cash, not a check. And according to your calendar, which was subpoenaed as part of the estate investigation, you had no babysitting scheduled that week." "Subpoenaed?" My father found his voice. "What exactly is happening here? Your mother-in-law suspected that Rachel was being falsely accused of theft and wanted the truth documented," Patricia explained. "She hired an investigator to compile evidence that could be used to clear Rachel's name if needed. What he found was far more extensive than simple theft. She distributed the next set of documents, printouts of text messages, emails, excerpts from Emma's journal." My parents read in growing silence, their faces registering shock, then disbelief, then something that looked like horror. I watched Emma instead. Her performance was fascinating, the slight tremor in her hands, the way her breath quickened, the tears forming in her eyes. But there was calculation behind it all, a desperate mental scrambling visible in the way her gaze kept darting to our parents, gauging their reactions, adjusting her strategy. "This is taken out of context," she tried, her voice breaking on cue. "That journal was private. It was just I was working through feelings. I didn't mean—" "You told Sarah Mitchum that I was spreading rumors about her," I said, my voice steady. "You told Coach Anderson I was quitting swim team. You told Aunt Carol I called her boring. You systematically destroyed every friendship, every mentorship, every connection I tried to build outside this family." I paused, letting each accusation land. "And you documented it. Like a project." Emma's tears were flowing now, but her eyes had gone hard. "You don't understand. You never understood. Everything was always so easy for you, grades, sports, everything. I had to work for everything, and nobody noticed, because you were already perfect. So you made sure I had nothing," I finished. "Not friends, not trust, not family." My mother's face had drained of color. She was staring at Emma like seeing her for the first time. "Tell me this isn't true." "It's not what it looks like." "Then what is it?" My father's voice was rough. "Because it looks like you've been lying to us for years. It looks like we threw your sister out based on accusations you fabricated." The word fabricated hung in the air. Emma flinched. "I didn't fabricate the money was—" She was stuttering now, the smooth lies that usually flowed so easily jamming against the weight of evidence. "You don't understand what it was like. Always being compared to her. Always being the one who needed help. So you made me the villain." I leaned forward. "You needed me to be the problem so you could be the victim. And when I was about to age out, about to leave for college, and build a life where you couldn't control the narrative, you accelerated the timeline. You got me kicked out so you could have their undivided attention without competition." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient noise of the building seemed to fade. My parents sat frozen, the evidence scattered between them like wreckage from an explosion. Emma's careful mask had shattered completely, revealing raw panic underneath. "But here's what you didn't know," I continued, my voice quiet but clear. "Grandma saw you. She saw what you were doing, and she made sure I'd have the resources to survive without them, without you. She left me a trust $67,000, and the truth about who you really are." Emma's face went white. "Grandma left you money?" "She left me more than that. She left me proof. She left me vindication." I gathered the papers into a neat stack. "She left me the ability to walk away knowing I'm not crazy, not defective, not the problem I was made to feel like." My mother was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. My father looked like he'd been struck, his usual composure completely shattered. But I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no sadness, just a strange, hollow finality. "I didn't come here for an apology," I said, standing. "I came here so you'd know the truth. What you do with it is your decision. But I'm done carrying the weight of Emma's lies, and your willingness to believe them." Patricia stood with me, collecting the duplicate files we'd prepared. "These are your copies. Review them at your leisure. If you have questions, you can contact my office." We were at the door when my mother finally spoke. "Rachel, wait." I turned. She looked older suddenly, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical appearance. "I'm so sorry." The words were barely audible. "I didn't know. I should have questioned, should have looked deeper, but I didn't know. The apology should have meant something. Maybe it would have, 7 months ago, but I'd built myself back from nothing without their help, without their belief, without their love. The person who'd needed that apology no longer existed." "I know you didn't," I said, "but that's not actually the problem, is it? The problem is that you didn't want to know." It was easier to believe I was the issue than to confront what believing that meant about Emma, about your parenting, about the family you'd built. I walked out before she could respond, Patricia at my side, leaving my family sitting in that conference room with the ruins of their comfortable narrative scattered across mahogany. In the elevator, Patricia asked, "How do you feel?" I considered the question. Empty, but in a good way, like I finally set down something I'd been carrying for too long. The doors opened to the lobby, sunlight streaming through glass walls, the city beyond continuing its indifferent motion. I stepped out into it, lighter than I'd been in years, untethered from the people who should have protected me but chose comfort instead. The call started 3 days after the confrontation. My mother first, leaving voicemails that grew progressively more desperate. Then my father, his messages shorter, more formal, as if he were negotiating a business deal rather than attempting to repair a relationship. Emma didn't call. She sent texts instead, paragraphs of justification wrapped in the language of therapy she'd clearly just learned. I listened to none of the voicemails all the way through. I read Emma's texts once, then archived them without responding. Patricia had warned me this would happen. Exposure creates panic, she'd explained over coffee the day after the meeting. They'll cycle through denial, bargaining, anger. Your silence will be interpreted as leverage, as you holding something over them. They won't understand that you've simply moved on. She was right. My mother's 5th voicemail included an offer to make things right financially, as if the problem could be solved with money. My father's 3rd message mentioned family therapy, mediation, finding a path forward together. Emma's texts evolved from explanation to accusation, her tone shifting from apologetic to angry when I failed to engage. I deleted the notifications and went to work. Marcus noticed the change in me, though he didn't comment directly. Instead, he started scheduling me for the morning shifts I preferred, gave me keys to open solo, trusted me with the kind of responsibilities that signaled respect rather than mere employment. One morning, restocking pastries before the early rush, he said casually, "You seem lighter." "I feel lighter," I admitted, arranging croissants in the display case with more attention than they required. Family stuff sorted out? Family stuff let go of. I looked up at him, this man who'd given me work when I had nothing, who'd never asked for my story but had somehow understood its weight. Turns out those aren't always the same thing. He nodded, wiping down the espresso machine with the methodical care he brought to everything. My daughter doesn't talk to me anymore. Her choice, and probably the right one. I wasn't a great father, drank too much. Wasn't around enough. She's better off without me in her life. He paused, meeting my eyes. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for people who've hurt us is let them live with what they've done. Not forgiveness, not revenge, just absence. The wisdom in his words settled over me like a familiar coat. Absence as an act of self-preservation rather than punishment. Silence as a boundary rather than a weapon. Sophie had a different perspective when I told her about the confrontation over cheap wine in her apartment. "So you just walked out? Didn't stay to watch them squirm?" "What would that accomplish?" I asked, swirling the wine in a plastic cup that had probably once held yogurt. "Satisfaction, justice, vindication." She counted them off on her fingers, each word emphasized. "They deserve to suffer for what they did to you." "Maybe, but I don't need to watch it happen." I took a sip, the wine acidic and young. "Their suffering doesn't heal me, it just keeps me tethered to them." She studied me with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "You're weirdly well-adjusted for someone whose family destroyed them." "I'm not well-adjusted, I'm just tired." The honesty surprised me. I'm tired of carrying anger, tired of imagining confrontations, tired of crafting the perfect comeback to people who aren't listening anyway. I want to build something new, not spend my life burning down the old. 2 weeks after the meeting, my mother appeared at the coffee shop. I saw her through the window before she entered, standing on the sidewalk, gathering courage. She looked smaller than I remembered, her expensive coat unable to mask the uncertainty in her posture. She ordered a latte she didn't drink and waited until my break. We sat at the corner table, the one with the wobbly leg that no one liked. The asymmetry felt appropriate. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said without preamble. "Individually and with your father. We're trying to understand how we let this happen." I said nothing, just waited. "Emma's been staying with my sister. She refuses therapy, says everyone is ganging up on her." My mother's fingers traced the rim of her cup, a nervous gesture I recognized from childhood. "Your father and I have been going through years of memories, questioning everything. Every achievement of Emma's that we celebrated, every excuse we made for her behavior, every time we chose to believe her over you." "That must be difficult," I said, my tone neutral. She looked up sharply, searching my face for sarcasm. Finding none seemed to unsettle her more. "Aren't you angry? Don't you hate us?" The questions hung between us. I considered them honestly, examining my internal landscape for the emotions she expected to find. "No," I said finally. "I did for a while. But anger is exhausting, and hate requires investment I don't have. Mostly I just feel sad about what could have been different." "We want to make amends." Her voice broke slightly. "We want you back in our lives. We'll do whatever it takes, therapy together, time, space, whatever you need." "Why?" The question emerged quieter than I intended. "Why do you want me back now?" She blinked, clearly not expecting to have to justify her offer. "Because you're our daughter. Because we love you. Because we made terrible mistakes and want to correct them." "You love the idea of being parents who fixed their mistake," I said gently. "You love the narrative of reconciliation, the happy ending where everyone forgives and moves forward, but you don't actually know me well enough to love who I am now." Her face crumpled. "That's not fair." "Probably not, but it's true." I leaned back, the chair creaking under the shift in weight. "You spent years believing I was a thief, a liar, someone capable of cruelty toward my own sister. You didn't question it, didn't investigate, didn't give me the benefit of doubt, And when I needed you most, you threw me out. Not metaphorically, literally, with a garbage bag and nowhere to go. I know, and I'm so sorry. I know you are. I believe you. I interrupted her apology, not unkindly. But sorry doesn't erase 7 months of thinking I was defective, of questioning my own memory and perception, of rebuilding myself from nothing. Sorry doesn't give me back the trust that was destroyed or the security that was ripped away. She was crying now, tears sliding down her face with the abandon of someone who'd been holding them back too long. So there's nothing we can do? No way to earn forgiveness? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe eventually. But right now, I need distance. I need to keep building the life I've started without you, to know it's stable and real and mine before I consider letting anyone from before back into it. How long? She asked desperately. Months? Years? I don't know that either. I glanced at the clock, my break was almost over. Maybe the question isn't how long, but whether you're willing to respect my boundaries without a timeline, without guaranteed forgiveness at the end. Can you give me space without it being a transaction? She opened her mouth, closed it, struggled with the answer. The struggle itself was revealing. She wanted absolution, closure, a clear path to redemption. The ambiguity of my terms clearly terrified her. I'll try, she said finally. Then try. I stood, my shift calling me back. If you mean it, prove it by respecting my silence. Don't call, don't show up, don't send messages through other people. Let me come to you if and when I'm ready. I walked back to the counter, leaving her with her untouched latte and the weight of consequences she was only beginning to comprehend. That night, I opened my laptop and transferred the trust money from the holding account Patricia had set up into my personal savings. $67,243. I stared at the number, this gift from a grandmother who'd seen me more clearly than my own parents had. With part of it, I paid off the balance on my online classes. With another portion, I put down first and last month's rent on a real apartment, not a converted garage, but an actual studio with a kitchen and a bathroom that didn't share walls with someone else's living room. I bought a bed frame that didn't come from a thrift store, sheets that matched, dishes that were a set rather than a collection of mismatched survivors. I built a life that was intentionally, specifically mine. Emma's texts eventually stopped. My father's calls dwindled to once a week, then once a month, then silence. My mother honored the boundary I'd set, though I suspected it cost her. That restraint meant more than any apology had. 6 months after the confrontation, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter on stationery that smelled faintly of the lavender sachets my mother kept in her desk. It was short, maybe 100 words, thanking me for forcing accountability, updating me on their progress in therapy, expressing hope that someday I might be willing to talk. It didn't ask for anything, didn't demand a response, just existed as an offering, without expectation. I read it 3 times, then placed it in a drawer with my grandmother's letter and the folder of evidence from Patricia. Documents that together formed a complete narrative: betrayal, protection, truth, and the possibility of something beyond pain. I didn't respond to my mother's letter, but I didn't throw it away either. That felt like its own kind of answer, an acknowledgement that the story wasn't finished even if this chapter was closed. On the anniversary of the day I'd been kicked out, I stood in my apartment, my real apartment, with my name on the lease and furniture I'd chosen, and recognized something fundamental had shifted. The girl who'd stood on that porch with a garbage bag no longer existed. She'd been dismantled by necessity and rebuilt with intention. I looked at the reflection in my window, the city lights beyond creating a halo effect around my silhouette, and understood that healing wasn't about forgiving the people who'd broken me. It was about becoming someone who no longer needed their validation to feel whole. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and entirely mine. Whatever came next would be my choice, built on my terms, with boundaries I'd learned to defend and a sense of self I'd earned through survival. I was free. Not because they'd released me, but because I'd released them. Here's what I learned from being cast out by the people who were supposed to protect me. Belief is a choice, and some people will always choose the easier story over the true one. My parents didn't believe Emma because she was more convincing. They believed her because believing me would have required them to confront uncomfortable truths about their parenting, their favoritism, and the family dynamic they'd spent years constructing. It was simpler to make me the problem than to dismantle the illusion of their fragile, needs constant protection daughter. That's the insidious part of manipulation within families. It thrives on established patterns. Once you've been cast in a role, breaking free requires everyone else to acknowledge they've been complicit in maintaining the script. Most people aren't willing to do that work. If you're watching this and something resonates, if you've been the scapegoat or the forgotten one, or the person whose truth gets dismissed because it's inconvenient, I want you to hear this. Your perception isn't flawed. Gaslighting works by making you question your own memory, your own experiences, your own reality. But that persistent voice inside you that says something isn't right? Trust it. Document it if you need to. Protect it fiercely. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty, even when people who benefit from your compliance call it that. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, even when family members who need you diminished say you've changed. Distance isn't failure, even when society insists that blood should bind you regardless of toxicity. Sometimes the most radical act of self-love is walking away from people who require your smallness to feel significant. Sometimes healing looks like silence. Sometimes freedom is a studio apartment, a job that respects you, and the knowledge that you survived what was designed to break you. You don't owe anyone access to the life you rebuilt from wreckage, not even the people who created the wreckage in the first place.